When I realized my family had completely forgotten about me at the restaurant and were probably already driving home, I walked calmly to the front desk, handed the manager my Black American Express card, and said, "I'd like to pay the $8.47 bill for table 12, and please inform the family when they return that their ride has left." That night, I received 11 frantic phone calls and 43 text messages begging me to come pick them up from Marcello's Italian Bistro, where they were washing dishes at 11 p.m. to work off their unpaid tab. Within a month, Jennifer was driving 2 hours every Sunday to personally apologize and help with my grocery shopping. Michael had set up a monthly allowance for my transportation and convenience fund, and the entire family learned that forgetting about Grandma Rose was the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been forgotten or dismissed by family members who took your presence for granted? Share your story below, because today you're going to learn that sometimes the person you overlook as just an old lady might be the one holding all the cards. This story is about the Saturday evening when I discovered that 45 years of putting family first meant nothing when my convenience became an afterthought for my son's busy lifestyle. When I learned that the woman who'd married into our family saw me not as a cherished elder, but as a transportation accessory that could be discarded when no longer immediately useful. My name is Rose Patricia Winters, and for the past 3 years, I'd been serving as the family's primary babysitter, chauffeur, and emergency contact, while my son Michael built his dental practice, and his wife Jennifer managed her real estate career. At 70 years old, I'd been happy to help my family succeed, driving my grandchildren to activities, watching them during school breaks, and providing the kind of reliable support that allowed 2 busy professionals to maintain their demanding schedules. What I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being seen as family and had become just another service provider, one who could apparently be forgotten, abandoned, and taken for granted without consequence. But that Saturday night at Marcello's would teach them exactly how expensive it is to underestimate a woman who's been quietly building power for 7 decades. Let me tell you about the life I built before I became the forgotten family chauffeur, sitting alone at table 12 while my own blood relatives drove home without me. I was born Rose Patricia O'Sullivan in 1954, the daughter of Irish immigrants who believed that respect was earned through hard work and that family loyalty was a sacred obligation that flowed in both directions. My father, Patrick O'Sullivan, worked as a master electrician for the Boston Transit Authority, while my mother, Catherine, managed the books for 3 small businesses in our South Boston neighborhood. Growing up in a household where every penny was accounted for and every family member's contribution was valued, taught me early lessons about the importance of financial independence and personal dignity. My parents might not have had much money, but they had something more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that respect cannot be bought, borrowed, or begged for. It can only be commanded through actions that demonstrate your worth. I met my late husband, James Winters, when I was 24 and working as a secretary for Hancock Insurance Company in downtown Boston. James was a claims adjuster with dreams of starting his own agency and the kind of old-fashioned values that made him open doors, pull out chairs, and treat me like the most important person in any room we entered together. We married in 1979 at St. Brigid's Cathedral, with both families blessing a union that everyone could see was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. For 37 years, James and I built something beautiful together. He established Winters Insurance Agency, which grew from a one-man operation in our converted garage to a thriving business with 12 employees and offices in 3 Massachusetts towns. I managed the financial side of the business while raising our son Michael, handling everything from payroll to tax preparation to client billing with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that turned James's entrepreneurial vision into sustainable prosperity. We weren't wealthy in the flashy sense that some people imagine wealth. We didn't have multiple homes or luxury cars or expensive jewelry, but we had something more valuable: True financial security built through decades of careful planning, smart investments, and the kind of conservative money management that ensures your family never has to worry about basic needs or emergency expenses. When Michael was born in 1982, James and I made a conscious decision that our son would grow up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of treating others with respect, and the responsibility that comes with financial success. We paid for his education through high school and college without allowing him to take on student debt, but we also required him to work part-time jobs and contribute to household responsibilities. We wanted him to appreciate what he had without taking it for granted. Michael thrived under this approach. He was an excellent student, a respectful son, and the kind of young man who thanked his parents for their sacrifices while working to build his own independent success. After graduating from Boston University with a degree in biology, he was accepted to Tufts Dental School, where he excelled academically and developed the clinical skills that would later make him one of the most respected dentists in our area. During Michael's dental school years, James and I continued building our financial foundation. The insurance agency was generating substantial profits, our real estate investments were appreciating steadily, and our retirement planning was progressing exactly as we'd hoped. By the time Michael graduated and began establishing his own practice, James and I had accumulated the kind of wealth that provided options and security, without creating the kind of ostentatious lifestyle that attracts unwanted attention. James passed away suddenly from a heart attack in 2016, just 6 months after we'd celebrated our 37th wedding anniversary, with a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where he'd proposed decades earlier. His death was devastating, but it didn't leave me financially vulnerable the way losing a spouse affects so many women my age. James had been meticulous about estate planning, life insurance, and ensuring that I would be completely provided for regardless of what happened to him. The inheritance I received when James died included the insurance agency, which I sold for $2.3 million, our paid-off home worth $650,000, investment accounts totaling $1.8 million, and life insurance proceeds of $500,000. At 62 years old, I found myself a wealthy widow with no financial worries and the freedom to focus on what mattered most to me, maintaining close relationships with my family and enjoying the grandchildren who represented the continuation of everything James and I had built together. Michael had married Jennifer Caldwell 2 years before his father's death, and their wedding had been a joyous celebration that James and I hosted with genuine pleasure. Jennifer seemed like a lovely young woman, educated, ambitious, and clearly devoted to Michael's happiness and success. She had a degree in business from Northeastern University and was building a career in real estate that showed real promise for future success. When their first child, Emma, was born in 2017, I was thrilled to become a grandmother and eager to provide whatever support the young family might need as they adjusted to parenthood while Michael continued building his dental practice. Jennifer seemed genuinely grateful for my involvement, frequently asking for advice about childcare and expressing appreciation for the baby gifts and practical help I provided during those early months. The pattern continued when their second child, Lucas, was born in 2019, and again when their third child, Sophie, arrived in 2021. Each time, I stepped in to provide the kind of support that allowed Michael and Jennifer to maintain their professional commitments while ensuring their children received loving, attentive care from someone who had a genuine investment in their well-being. What began as occasional babysitting during date nights gradually evolved into regular childcare during Jennifer's real estate showings and Michael's evening dental emergencies. I was happy to help, genuinely enjoyed spending time with my grandchildren, and appreciated feeling useful and needed during a period of my life when many women my age struggle with feelings of irrelevance and purposelessness. The requests for help became more frequent after Jennifer decided to pursue her real estate license and began working for Prestige Properties, one of the most successful agencies in our area. Real estate, she explained, required flexibility and availability that was difficult to maintain with traditional childcare arrangements. Clients wanted to see properties on evenings and weekends, and business development often required attending networking events and professional development seminars. "Rose, I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you do for us," Jennifer would say, when asking me to watch the children during another evening appointment. "Having you available makes it possible for me to really focus on building my career without worrying about the kids." I was proud to contribute to Jennifer's professional success and pleased that my help was enabling both Michael and Jennifer to pursue their ambitious goals without compromising their children's care. The arrangement seemed to benefit everyone. The children received loving attention from their grandmother, Michael and Jennifer could focus on their careers without guilt or worry, and I felt valued and necessary rather than like a lonely widow, rattling around in an empty house. But as Jennifer's real estate career gained momentum and Michael's dental practice continued expanding, the nature of their requests began to change in ways that I initially didn't recognize as problematic. Instead of asking if I was available to watch the children, they began simply informing me about their schedules and assuming my availability. Instead of expressing gratitude for specific instances of help, they began treating my assistance as a given rather than a gift. The shift was so gradual that I didn't immediately recognize it as a fundamental change in our family dynamic. When Jennifer stopped saying please and thank you for routine childcare requests, I told myself it was because we'd become comfortable enough with each other that formal politeness was unnecessary. When Michael began making assumptions about my availability without checking my schedule first, I convinced myself it was evidence of how much they trusted and relied on me. What I didn't understand was that my willingness to be helpful and available was being systematically transformed into an obligation that Jennifer and Michael felt entitled to expect, rather than grateful to receive. My role was evolving from beloved grandmother who occasionally provided assistance to unpaid domestic staff whose primary function was enabling their lifestyle choices. The pattern became most apparent during school vacation weeks, when Jennifer and Michael would make professional and social commitments that required full-time childcare without consulting me about my own plans or preferences. Spring break, summer vacation, winter recess, all became periods when I was expected to provide intensive childcare, while Jennifer attended real estate conferences and Michael participated in dental continuing education programs. "The kids just love spending time with you," Jennifer would say when informing me about their latest travel plans. "And honestly, Rose, you're so much better with them than any babysitter we could hire. They're lucky to have such a devoted grandmother." But the children weren't just spending time with me. They were being cared for by me, while their parents pursued opportunities that enhanced their own lives without any consideration for the impact on mine. Jennifer's real estate success was built partly on her ability to be available for client demands because she had reliable free childcare. Michael's professional development was possible because he never had to worry about arranging care for his children during his absences. My contribution to their success was substantial and ongoing, but it was never acknowledged as such. Instead, my help was reframed as the natural behavior of a loving grandmother, rather than recognized as the significant practical and financial support that it actually represented. The financial value of my contributions was something I calculated privately, but never mentioned to Michael or Jennifer. Professional childcare for 3 children would cost approximately $25 per hour, and I was providing an average of 30 hours per week. Over the course of 3 years, my free childcare had saved them approximately $117,000. Money that they were able to invest in Jennifer's real estate business development and Michael's practice expansion. But my contributions went far beyond childcare. I regularly purchased clothing, toys, and educational materials for the children. I covered the cost of activities like swimming lessons, art classes, and music instruction when Michael and Jennifer's schedules prevented them from handling registration and payment. I provided transportation to and from school, medical appointments, and social events, saving them both time and the expense of alternative arrangements. Most significantly, I had quietly funded several major expenses that helped establish their comfortable lifestyle. When Michael's dental practice needed a $50,000 equipment upgrade, I provided an interest-free loan that was never formally documented and never repaid. When Jennifer wanted to purchase a luxury vehicle that would enhance her professional image, with real estate clients, I covered the $15,000 down payment as an early Christmas gift. When they decided to renovate their kitchen to create the kind of entertaining space that would support Jennifer's networking goals, I contributed $25,000 toward the project. My financial support had totaled more than $200,000 over 3 years, not including the ongoing value of free childcare, transportation, and incidental expenses. But none of these contributions were acknowledged as investments in their success or recognized as evidence of my commitment to their family's prosperity. Instead, my generosity was treated as the expected behavior of a grandmother with financial resources, rather than the extraordinary support it actually represented. The dynamic reached its most concerning point when Jennifer began making social and professional commitments that required my childcare services without informing me until the last minute. Business dinners, networking events, client entertainment, all became my responsibility to accommodate by providing whatever childcare support was needed. "Rose, I'm so sorry for the short notice," Jennifer would say when calling an hour before an important appointment. "But this client specifically requested an evening showing, and you know how important it is for me to be flexible with high-value prospects. Could you possibly watch the kids tonight?" These requests were presented as emergencies that required my immediate assistance, but I began to suspect that Jennifer was accepting professional commitments without considering childcare arrangements because she assumed my availability. She wasn't planning around my schedule. She was planning with the assumption that I would always be available to accommodate whatever demands her career required. The most telling incident occurred when Jennifer accepted an invitation to a weekend real estate conference in Chicago without checking my availability first. She informed me about the trip on a Tuesday, expecting me to provide full-time childcare from Friday evening through Sunday night, so she could attend networking events and educational seminars. "This conference could really launch my career to the next level," she explained when I expressed surprise about the short notice. "The connections I'll make and the training I'll receive could double my commission income over the next year." When I mentioned that I'd already made plans to visit my sister in Vermont that weekend, Jennifer's response revealed exactly how she viewed our arrangement. "Can't you reschedule with your sister?" she asked, her tone suggesting that my plans were obviously less important than her professional opportunities. "I mean, you can visit family anytime, but this conference only happens once a year." Visit family anytime. Jennifer was suggesting that my relationship with my sister was less significant than her business networking, and that my personal plans should automatically be sacrificed whenever her career required my assistance. That conversation marked the beginning of my understanding that my role in their family had fundamentally changed from cherished relative to convenient resource. My time, energy, and financial support were being treated as assets that Jennifer and Michael could access whenever needed, rather than gifts that deserved appreciation and respect. But I still hadn't grasped the full extent of how my status had deteriorated until the evening that would change everything. The Saturday night dinner at Marcello's Italian Bistro that was supposed to be a celebration of Michael's latest professional achievement, and instead became the moment when I realized that my own family saw me as forgettable. The dinner had been planned to celebrate Michael being selected as Dentist of the Year by the Massachusetts Dental Association, an honor that recognized both his clinical excellence and his contributions to community health programs. As his mother, I was tremendously proud of his achievement and excited to participate in a family celebration that acknowledged his hard work and professional success. But from the moment we arrived at Marcello's, it became clear that the evening was more about Jennifer's social media documentation of their success than about family celebration of Michael's accomplishment. Jennifer spent the first 20 minutes of dinner arranging and rearranging the table setting, photographing the elegant restaurant environment, and creating content that portrayed their family as sophisticated and successful. "Rose, could you move down a seat so I can get a better angle of Michael with his award?" Jennifer asked, not rudely, but with the casual expectation that I would accommodate her content creation goals without question. Throughout dinner, Jennifer continued managing her social media presence, taking photos of the food, recording video, of Michael discussing his achievement, and crafting captions that presented their evening as aspirational lifestyle content for her followers. I wasn't included in any of the photos or videos. Not because Jennifer was deliberately excluding me, but because I simply wasn't part of the narrative she was creating about their successful life. The exclusion from Jennifer's documentation wasn't particularly hurtful. I understood that her real estate business benefited from projecting a certain image, and including a 70-year-old woman in party photos might not align with her target demographic. What bothered me was the underlying assumption that my presence was incidental to their celebration, rather than meaningful to the family moment we were supposedly sharing. As dinner progressed, the conversation focused primarily on Michael's future professional goals and Jennifer's expanding real estate business. They discussed vacation plans, home improvement projects, and career opportunities with the kind of enthusiasm and detailed planning that made it clear they saw their lives as an exciting adventure they were building together. But when the topic turned to practical considerations like childcare for their upcoming trips and professional commitments, their tone shifted from excited planning to logistics management. My involvement in their future plans wasn't discussed as family participation in shared experiences. It was referenced as operational support that would make their adventures possible. "Mom's always so good about helping with the kids when we need to travel," Michael said when Jennifer mentioned a real estate conference in Florida that would require weekend childcare. "We're really lucky to have such reliable support." Reliable support. Michael was describing my relationship with my grandchildren as a service arrangement rather than recognizing it as the loving family bond it actually was. As the evening continued, I found myself feeling increasingly invisible at what was supposed to be a family celebration. Michael and Jennifer were completely absorbed in their conversation about future plans and professional opportunities, while I sat quietly finishing my meal and wondering when I'd become someone who could be present but not really seen. The moment that crystallized everything happened when Jennifer's phone rang during dessert. One of her real estate clients needed to discuss a potential offer on a property, and Jennifer immediately shifted into professional mode. "This could be a really big commission," she explained as she answered the call, stepping away from the table to conduct her business conversation. While Jennifer handled her client call, Michael received a text message from a colleague about a dental conference in Las Vegas that would require making registration decisions immediately. He became absorbed in researching the conference details and coordinating with his practice partners about coverage during his absence. I sat at our table, finishing my coffee and watching my son and daughter-in-law manage their professional lives, while completely forgetting that we were supposed to be having a family celebration. Neither of them seemed to notice that their behavior was treating our special dinner as merely the convenient location for conducting business, rather than time set aside for family connection. When Jennifer returned from her phone call, she was energized about the potential real estate deal and immediately began discussing the logistics with Michael. When his conference research was complete, he shared details about the professional development opportunity and the travel arrangements it would require. For the next 15 minutes, they discussed their respective business opportunities while I sat silently, feeling like a stranger who'd accidentally been seated at someone else's table. Their excitement about their professional lives was completely absorbing their attention, and my presence had become irrelevant to their conversation. The final moment of revelation came when Jennifer suddenly stood up and announced, "I need to use the restroom before we leave, and then I want to call my client back with some additional questions about their financing options. I should call Dr. Peterson about covering my patients while I'm at the conference," Michael added, also standing up. "This might take a few minutes." "We'll just be right back, Mom," Michael said, already moving toward the restaurant's back hallway, where he could have a private phone conversation. "Just wait right here, Grandma Rose," Jennifer added, gathering her phone and purse as she headed toward the bathroom area. And then they were gone. Both of them, along with Emma, Lucas, and Sophie, who had followed their parents toward the bathrooms because children naturally gravitate toward wherever the action seems to be happening. I sat alone at our table, which was still covered with dessert plates, coffee cups, and the remnants of what should have been a family celebration. The restaurant was busy with Saturday evening diners, and the sounds of conversation and laughter from other tables created a stark contrast to my solitude. For the first 10 minutes, I assumed they would return shortly. Jennifer's bathroom visit and phone call might take a few minutes, and Michael's conversation with his colleague could require some detailed coordination about patient coverage. But as 15 minutes stretched to 20, and 20 stretched to 25, I began to understand that something more significant was happening. This wasn't just taking longer than expected. They had completely forgotten about me. I could see the restaurant's front entrance from our table, and after 30 minutes of waiting, I watched Jennifer walk through the front door, talking on her phone and heading directly to their car in the parking lot. A few minutes later, Michael emerged from the restaurant's back exit, also on his phone, and joined Jennifer at their vehicle. I watched through the window as they loaded Emma, Lucas, and Sophie into their car seats, still engaged in their respective phone conversations. I watched Jennifer get into the driver's seat and Michael settle into the passenger seat. I watched them drive out of the parking lot and disappear into Saturday evening traffic. They had forgotten me completely. Not forgotten to include me in their conversation, not forgotten to check if I was ready to leave. They had literally forgotten that I existed. I sat at that table for another 5 minutes, processing the full implications of what had just happened. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. This was the inevitable result of my gradual transformation from family member to background support staff, so peripheral to their consciousness that my absence didn't register as significant enough to interrupt their important business calls. The busboy approached our table and began clearing away the dinner plates, assuming our party had finished and departed. When he reached for my coffee cup, I gently stopped him. "Actually, I'm not quite finished yet," I said calmly, "but I will need to speak with your manager about settling our bill." The young man looked confused. "I think your family already took care of the check, ma'am." "No," I said, maintaining my composure despite the fury building in my chest. "They didn't." 5 minutes later, I was standing at Marcello's front desk, speaking with the evening manager about a situation that was as unprecedented as it was revealing. "The bill for Table 12 hasn't been paid," the manager explained when I asked about the status of our dinner charges. "The total is $847.50 for your party of 6, including the wine service and premium menu selections. $847. Michael and Jennifer had ordered expensive wine, premium entrees, and elaborate desserts for what was supposed to be a celebration of his professional achievement. They had spent nearly $900 on a dinner that was meant to honor Michael's success, and then they had driven away without paying for it because they'd been too absorbed in their own business concerns to remember that someone needed to handle the bill. More importantly, they'd been too absorbed in their own lives to remember that someone, me, was still sitting at that table. "I'd like to take care of the bill," I told the manager, pulling out my black American Express card, the one that James had given me years earlier with instructions to use whenever I wanted to make a statement about my independence and financial capability. "Are you sure, ma'am?" the manager asked, clearly concerned about the situation. "This is quite a substantial amount, and it seems unusual that your family would leave you to handle such a large check." "Oh, I'm absolutely certain," I replied, my voice carrying the kind of steel that James used to call my boardroom tone, the voice I used when I meant business and wouldn't tolerate any discussion. As the manager processed my payment, I made one additional request that would ensure this evening's lesson was thoroughly understood. When my family returns to inquire about their missing bill, I said calmly. Please inform them that their transportation has left, and they'll need to make alternative arrangements for getting home. Ma'am? The manager asked, clearly confused. About what I was suggesting. They drove here in my car, I explained, which wasn't technically true but wasn't exactly false either. I had driven myself to dinner and was certainly under no obligation to provide return transportation for people who'd forgotten my existence. And since they forgot to include me in their departure plans, I've made alternative arrangements for my own transportation home. What I didn't mention was that my alternative arrangements consisted of driving my own car home while leaving, them to discover that actions have consequences. Should I give them any particular message? The manager asked. Yes, I said, taking my receipt and credit card from his hands. Please tell them that Grandma Rose enjoyed her dinner very much, paid for everyone's meal as a gesture of appreciation for such a memorable evening, and that she hopes they enjoy the rest of their Saturday night. I walked out of Marcello's Italian Bistro at 9:47 p.m., feeling more empowered than I had in years. For the first time in 3 years, I had taken action that prioritized my own dignity over their convenience. For the first time since becoming their unpaid support staff, I had reminded them that my presence in their lives was a choice rather than an obligation. The drive home took 25 minutes, during which I had time to reflect on exactly how thoroughly Michael and Jennifer had misunderstood the nature of our family relationship. They'd assumed that my love for them and my willingness to help meant I would accept any level of disrespect or dismissal without consequence. They were about to learn that assumption was the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. My phone started ringing before I even reached my driveway. The first call came at 10:03 p.m. from Michael's number, followed immediately by a call from Jennifer's phone, then another from Michael, then a text message, then more calls in rapid succession. I let every single one go to voicemail while I pulled into my garage, gathered my purse, and walked calmly into the house that James and I had built together. The house where I made my own decisions and lived by my own rules. The voicemails were exactly what I'd expected. Panic, confusion, and the gradual dawning realization that their convenient transportation and bill-paying service had not only abandoned them, but had left them in a situation that would require actual consequences for their thoughtless behavior. Mom, where are you? Michael's first message began, his voice carrying the kind of frantic confusion of someone who'd just discovered that actions have repercussions. We came back to the table and you weren't there, and the manager said you'd paid our bill and left. We don't understand what happened. Please call us back immediately. The second voicemail from Jennifer revealed how completely they'd misunderstood both the situation and my character. Rose, I don't know what kind of miscommunication happened, but we really need you to come back and pick us up. The kids are getting tired and we have early commitments tomorrow. This isn't funny anymore. Jennifer apparently thought my response to being forgotten and abandoned was some kind of joke that had gone on too long for her. Convenience. By 10:30 p.m., I'd received 11 phone calls and 43 text messages, and the tone of their communications had evolved from confused frustration to genuine panic as they began to understand the scope of their predicament. They were stranded at an upscale restaurant with 3 young children, no transportation, and apparently no ability to cover an $847 dinner bill that they'd assumed someone else would handle. The most revealing message came at 10:45 p.m., when Jennifer's voice had shifted from annoyance to desperation. Rose, please. The restaurant manager is saying we need to work off our bill or he's calling the police. We don't have enough cash or credit available to cover the charges, and our cards are being declined. Please come back. We're sorry if we did something wrong, but we really need your help right now. They were sorry if they'd done something wrong. After literally forgetting my existence and driving away without me, Jennifer was offering a conditional apology that suggested she still didn't understand what they'd actually done or why it was unacceptable. I made myself a cup of tea, settled into James's favorite armchair in our comfortable living room, and began returning their calls with the kind of calm, measured responses that would help them understand exactly how fundamentally their world had just changed. Michael answered on the first ring. "Mom! Thank God you're answering! Where are you? What happened? We need you to come get us right now." "Hello, Michael," I said calmly, taking a sip of my tea. "I'm at home, having a peaceful evening after a lovely dinner at Marcello's. How are you doing? How are we doing?" Michael's voice cracked with disbelief. "Mom, we're stuck at the restaurant. They're saying we have to wash dishes to pay off our bill. This is insane." "Oh my," I replied with genuine concern. "That does sound like quite a predicament. How exactly did you end up in a situation where you couldn't pay for your own dinner?" The silence that followed my question stretched long enough for Michael to begin processing the implications of what I was asking. They'd gone to an expensive restaurant, ordered premium meals and wine, made no arrangements for payment, and then left the establishment without settling their bill. The only reason they weren't currently facing criminal charges was because I'd intervened on their behalf. "Mom," Michael said slowly, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when he was beginning to realize he was in serious trouble. "Didn't you know we expected you to drive us home?" "No, Michael, I didn't know that," I replied honestly. See, when you and Jennifer disappeared for 30 minutes and then left the restaurant without me, I assumed you'd made your own arrangements for transportation and payment. Was I supposed to read your minds about your expectations?" Another long silence. Then, "We didn't leave without you on purpose, Mom. We just got caught up in some important business calls, and we thought you were right behind us." "You thought I was right behind you," I repeated slowly. "For 30 minutes. While you loaded 3 children into car seats, conducted phone conversations, and drove away from the restaurant. You thought I was somehow invisibly following along during all of that activity. It wasn't like that," Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "We were distracted by important business matters." "I understand completely," I said, maintaining my calm tone. "Business matters are indeed important. Much more important than keeping track of elderly family members, apparently." "Mom, please," Michael said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We're really sorry this happened. It was an honest mistake. But we need you to come pick us up right now. Jennifer's having to wash dishes in the kitchen, and I'm watching the kids in the restaurant lobby." "This is humiliating." "I can imagine it would be," I agreed sympathetically. "Being forgotten and abandoned by your own family is indeed quite humiliating. I'm glad you're beginning to understand how that feels." The realization of what I was actually saying hit Michael like a physical blow. "Mom? You're not coming to get us, are you?" "Oh, Michael," I said gently. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, I've already made arrangements for my own transportation home, just as you made arrangements for yours. I assumed you'd want to handle your own affairs the same way you handled dinner tonight, independently and without consulting me." "But how are we supposed to get home?" Michael asked, his voice small and defeated. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said confidently. "You're both intelligent, successful professionals. I have complete faith in your ability to solve problems and manage unexpected challenges." After ending the call with Michael, I turned off my phone and enjoyed the most peaceful evening I'd had in years. No last-minute childcare requests, no assumptions about my availability, no taking my presence for granted. Just quiet solitude in the home I'd built with James, where my decisions mattered and my dignity was respected. But this was only the beginning of the education I was about to provide about respect, appreciation, and the consequences of taking family for granted. The next morning, I woke up refreshed and energized in a way I hadn't felt for months. There's something profoundly liberating about finally standing up for yourself after years of accepting treatment that doesn't match your worth. I made coffee, read the Sunday newspaper, and prepared for what I knew would be a very interesting day. The first indication that my lesson had been thoroughly received came when I found Jennifer's car in my driveway at 8:30 a.m., with Jennifer, herself sitting on my front porch steps, looking like she hadn't slept all night. She was still wearing her dress from dinner. Her hair was disheveled, and her expression carried the kind of exhaustion that comes from spending hours washing dishes in a restaurant kitchen. When I opened my front door, Jennifer immediately stood up, her face a mixture of exhaustion, embarrassment, and genuine remorse that I hadn't seen from her in years. "Rose," she began, her voice hoarse and shaky. "I need to apologize. Really apologize. Not because I need something from you, but because what we did last night was inexcusable." I stepped out onto my porch, noting that Jennifer was trembling slightly. Whether from exhaustion, emotion, or the cool morning air, I couldn't tell. "I'm listening," I said simply, settling into one of my porch chairs and gesturing for her to sit down. Jennifer perched on the edge of the other chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she struggled to find words adequate for the situation. "We forgot you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We literally forgot that you were there. Forgot that you needed a ride home. Forgot that you existed. And then we left you to pay for our dinner while we drove away like you were nothing." The pain in Jennifer's voice was genuine, and I could see that the night's events had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about how she'd been treating me. "We washed dishes until 2 a.m., she continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. The manager made it clear that was the only alternative to calling the police for theft of services. The kids fell asleep on restaurant chairs while Michael and I scrubbed pots and cleaned floors. And the whole time, all I could think about was how many times you've paid for things, how many hours you've spent taking care of our children, how much you've done for our family, and how we've never really thanked you. Not properly." Jennifer paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Rose, I need you to know that I understand what happened last night wasn't just about a forgotten ride or an unpaid bill. It was about respect. It was about family. It was about treating someone I love like she matters. And I failed completely." I sat quietly, allowing Jennifer to continue her apology without interruption. This was clearly something she needed to say, and I was curious to see how deep her understanding actually went. "I've been thinking about everything while we were washing those dishes," Jennifer said, her voice becoming stronger and more determined. "About how often we assume you'll be available for childcare without asking about your own plans. About how we talk around you instead of including you in conversations. About how I've been treating you like hired help instead of like Michael's mother and my children's grandmother." She looked directly at me for the first time since beginning her apology. "You have been incredibly generous with your time, your energy, and your money," she said. "You've supported our careers, our family, and our dreams in ways that we've never properly acknowledged. And instead of treating you like the valuable family member you are, we've been treating you like a convenience we can take for granted." Jennifer's apology was more comprehensive and insightful than I'd expected, but I needed to understand whether she truly grasped the scope of the changes that needed to happen. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "I appreciate your apology, and I can see that last night was a learning experience for you, but I need to understand what you think needs to change going forward." Jennifer nodded, as if she'd been expecting this question and had been preparing her answer during the long night of dishwashing. "Everything needs to change," she said without hesitation. "The way we communicate with you, the way we make requests. Instead of assumptions, the way we include you in family decisions and social events. The way we show appreciation for everything you do for us." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And I think we need to have some serious conversations about compensation," she added, her voice becoming more businesslike. "Not because I want to turn our family relationship into a transaction, but because I've realized that the value of your contributions has been enormous, and we've been taking advantage of your generosity. Compensation. Jennifer was voluntarily raising the topic that I'd been thinking about but had never mentioned. This suggested that her understanding of the situation was deeper than I'd initially credited. "What kind of compensation are you thinking about?" I asked. "I don't know exactly," Jennifer admitted, "but I know that professional childcare for 3 children costs about $25 an hour, and you've been providing way more than just childcare. You've been providing transportation, meals, emergency coverage, and financial support that has probably saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 3 years." Jennifer's math was actually quite accurate, which suggested she'd been doing some serious thinking about the economics of our family relationship. "I think we need to set up some kind of regular payment system," she continued. "Not because you need the money, but because paying for your services will help us remember that your time and energy are valuable and shouldn't be taken for granted." This was exactly the kind of thinking I'd hoped last night's lesson would inspire. Jennifer was connecting the dots between respect and compensation, understanding that people value what they pay for and take for granted what they receive for free. "And what about Michael?" I asked. "Does he share your perspective on these issues?" Jennifer's expression became slightly pained. "Michael is processing. Last night was really hard for him. He's never had to face the possibility of being arrested, never had to work in a restaurant kitchen, never had to explain to his children why Daddy and Mommy were washing dishes instead of going home." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "But more than that, I think he's struggling with the realization that he's been treating his own mother the same way his father treated her before he died, like someone whose contributions don't need to be acknowledged because they're expected rather than appreciated." This comparison to James surprised me. "What do you mean?" "Michael told me once that one of his biggest regrets was never properly thanking his father for everything James did to support his education and career," Jennifer explained. "He said he always assumed there would be time to express gratitude later, and then James died before Michael could tell him how much his sacrifices had meant." Jennifer looked at me directly again. "I think Michael is terrified that he's been making the same mistake with you, taking your love and support for granted instead of appreciating it while he has the chance." This insight into Michael's emotional state was helpful, but I needed to see his recognition and remorse directly, rather than filtered through Jennifer's interpretation. "Is Michael planning to speak with me himself?" I asked. "He's home with the kids right now," Jennifer said. "But he asked me to tell you that he'd like to come over this afternoon to apologize personally and discuss how we can rebuild our family relationship in a way that shows proper respect for you." "And what about practical matters?" I asked. "Childcare arrangements, financial discussions, family decision-making processes?" Jennifer nodded eagerly. "We want to start over completely. No more assumptions about your availability. No more taking your financial support for granted. No more excluding you from family conversations and decisions." She paused, then added, "And we want to set up formal compensation for your childcare services, even if you don't need the money financially. We think paying you appropriately will help us maintain the right mindset about the value of your contributions." This conversation was progressing better than I'd hoped, but I needed to make sure Jennifer understood that words alone wouldn't be sufficient to repair the damage that had been done to our relationship. "Jennifer," I said, "I appreciate everything you've said this morning, and I can see that last night was a genuine wake-up call for you. But I need to understand that you realize how serious this situation has become." Jennifer nodded solemnly. "I know that we've damaged your trust in us," she said. "I know that sorry isn't enough to fix 3 years of taking you for granted. And I know that we're going to have to prove through our actions that we're serious about changing how we treat you." "What kind of actions?" I asked. "Whatever you think is appropriate," Jennifer said. "We know that we need to earn back your trust and your willingness to help our family. We're not in a position to make demands or set conditions. You have every right to decide what level of involvement you want with our family going forward." This was the response I'd been hoping for. Acknowledgement that the power dynamic in our relationship needed to fundamentally change, with my needs and preferences taking priority over their convenience. Jennifer, I want you to understand something. Important, I said. Last night wasn't just about being forgotten at a restaurant. It was about 3 years of gradual disrespect that culminated in being literally abandoned by my own family. Jennifer nodded, tears starting to flow again. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, I continued, it's going to require more than apologies and good intentions. It's going to require fundamental changes in how you and Michael think about family obligations, respect for elders, and appreciation for the people who support your success. We understand, Jennifer said, and we're committed to making whatever changes are necessary. I hope so, I said, standing up from my chair to signal that our conversation was concluding. Because this is the only chance you're going to get to demonstrate that you've learned from this experience. Jennifer stood as well, her expression showing that she understood the gravity of my words. Rose, she said, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything right now, but I hope you'll give us the opportunity to prove that we can do better. We'll see, I said. But Jennifer, I want you to understand that my willingness to continue helping your family is no longer unconditional. You've lost the privilege of taking my support for granted. From now on, you'll need to earn it. As Jennifer walked back to her car, I could see that she was processing the full implications of what I'd said. The woman who'd been treating me as unpaid domestic staff was beginning to understand that she was now in the position of having to prove her worthiness to receive my continued assistance. But Jennifer's apology and newfound understanding were only the first step in the transformation I was planning to orchestrate. Michael still needed to demonstrate his recognition of how fundamentally our family dynamic was going to change, and both of them needed to understand that words would be meaningless without consistent actions that proved their respect for my value and dignity. The education I'd begun at Marcello's was far from complete. But watching Jennifer drive away after our morning conversation, I felt confident that the foundation had been established for the kind of family relationship I deserved. One built on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and recognition of my worth rather than assumptions about my availability. My phone rang as I was preparing lunch, and Michael's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, his voice carried a humility I hadn't heard since he was a young boy who'd disappointed me and was genuinely sorry for his behavior. Mom, he said, Jennifer told me about your conversation this morning. I know I need to apologize to you personally, and I know I need to understand how we can fix what we've broken. I'm listening, Michael, I said. Can I come over this afternoon? I want to talk with you about everything, not just last night, but the way we've been treating you for years. I want to understand what I need to do to be the kind of son you deserve. The vulnerability in Michael's voice suggested that Jennifer had accurately conveyed the depth of understanding that last night's experience had forced upon him. Of course, I said. Come over whenever you're ready. Mom? Michael added, before ending the call. I love you. And I'm sorry it took washing dishes until 2 a.m. for me to remember that you deserve better than what we've been giving you. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my strategy was working exactly as I'd hoped. Sometimes the most effective way to teach people your value is to remove yourself from their lives long enough for them to experience what they've been taking for granted. Michael and Jennifer were about to discover that rebuilding their relationship with me would require more than apologies and promises. It would require fundamental changes in how they viewed family obligations, respect for elders, and appreciation for the people who make their comfortable lives possible. But first, they would need to prove that they understood the difference between saying they valued me and actually treating me like someone whose value was indispensable to their family's success and happiness. The afternoon conversation with Michael would determine whether my son had truly learned the lesson I'd spent the previous evening teaching, or whether additional education would be necessary to help him understand his new reality. Michael arrived at my house that afternoon carrying a bouquet of white roses, my favorite flowers, and wearing the kind of expression I remembered from his childhood when he'd done something wrong and genuinely wanted to make amends. But this wasn't childhood misbehavior we were addressing. This was a fundamental breakdown in family respect that had been building for 3 years, and I needed to understand whether my son truly comprehended the magnitude of what needed to change. "Mom," he said as I opened the door, "I brought these because I remember you always said white roses represented new beginnings and second chances. I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to start over and be the son you raised me to be." I accepted the flowers and invited him in, noting that his hands were still rough and slightly raw from the previous night's dishwashing experience. There was something poetic about my successful dentist son bearing the physical evidence of manual labor as he came to apologize for taking his mother's sacrifices for granted. We sat in my living room, the same room where James and I had planned Michael's future, celebrated his achievements, and dreamed about the family legacy we were building together. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now having to teach my adult son lessons about respect and appreciation that should have been ingrained decades earlier. "Michael," I said, settling into my chair with the roses in my lap, "before we discuss what happened last night, I think we need to talk about how we got to a place where forgetting and abandoning me seemed like something that could happen accidentally." Michael nodded, his expression serious and attentive in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. "You're right, Mom. Last night was just the culmination of a pattern that's been building for a long time. I need to understand how I let that pattern develop." "Tell me about when this arrangement with your family first began," I said. "What was your understanding of what I was offering and what you needed from me?" Michael took a deep breath, clearly having spent considerable time thinking about this question during his sleepless night. "It started when Emma was born in 2017, he began. "Jennifer was struggling with postpartum depression. I was trying to establish my practice, and we were both overwhelmed by the reality of caring for a newborn while managing our professional responsibilities." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You offered to help with childcare, and at the time it felt like a godsend. We were exhausted, financially stretched from my practice startup costs, and honestly terrified that we weren't going to be able to manage everything successfully." "And what was my motivation for offering that help?" I asked. "You said you wanted to be involved in your grandchild's life," Michael replied. "You said that helping us during those early months would allow you to bond with Emma while giving Jennifer time to recover, and me the opportunity to focus on building the practice that would support our family's future." This was an accurate recollection of how our arrangement had begun, but I wanted to understand how Michael's perception of my motivations had evolved over time. "Did you see my help as temporary assistance during a crisis, or as the beginning of a long-term arrangement?" I asked. Michael's expression became uncomfortable. "Initially, I thought it was temporary," he admitted. "But as time went on, and especially after Lucas and Sophie were born, it became easier to rely on your help than to develop other solutions. Easier to rely on my help." Michael was beginning to articulate the fundamental problem with how our family dynamic had developed. "And during this time, how did you view my contributions? Were they favors you were grateful to receive, or services you expected me to provide?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications of what I was asking. "Mom, I think that's where I made my biggest mistake," he said finally. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing your help as generous gifts and started seeing them as what grandmothers naturally do for their families. What grandmothers naturally do." Michael was acknowledging that he'd reframed my extraordinary support as ordinary family obligation, which had made it easier to take for granted rather than appreciate. "Michael," I said gently, "I want you to think back to the early days of your practice, when you were struggling to establish your patient base and build your reputation. Do you remember what your financial situation was like?" "We were barely making it," Michael said immediately. "The practice startup costs were enormous. Jennifer wasn't working yet because of the new baby, and we were living on student loan money and credit cards. There were months when I wasn't sure we were going to be able to make our mortgage payments. And during that period, What kind of support did I provide beyond childcare? Michael's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he began to catalog my financial contributions during those crucial early years. You paid for Emma's medical bills when our insurance didn't cover everything, he said slowly. You bought us groceries when money was tight. You covered the down payment on our first house because we couldn't qualify for the mortgage without your help. He paused, clearly realizing there was more. You loaned me the money for my practice equipment when the bank financing fell through. You paid for Jennifer's real estate licensing courses when she decided to start working. You covered childcare costs when you weren't available so we wouldn't have to miss work opportunities. How much money do you think those contributions totaled? I asked. Michael was quiet for several minutes, clearly trying to calculate the full scope of my financial support over the years. I don't know exactly, he said finally, but it was substantial. Probably more than $100,000. Maybe more than $200,000 when you include the value of free childcare and all the other support you've provided. It was actually closer to $300,000, I said calmly. But the specific amount isn't really the point. The point is understanding how you thought about those contributions at the time you were receiving them. Michael looked stricken. I thought about them as incredibly generous help from a mother who wanted to see her son succeed, he said. I was grateful, and I assumed I'd be able to repay you eventually, both financially and by taking care of you, as you got older. And what changed? I asked. When did gratitude transform into expectation? This was the core question that I needed Michael to understand if we were going to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. Michael was silent for a long time, clearly struggling to identify the specific moments when his attitude had shifted. I think it was gradual, he said finally. As my practice became successful and our financial situation stabilized, I started focusing more on maintaining our lifestyle than on remembering how we'd gotten there. Jennifer's real estate career took off. We moved to the bigger house. The kids got involved in activities that required more coordination and support. He paused, his voice becoming smaller. I think I started seeing your help as part of the infrastructure that made our lifestyle possible, rather than as ongoing gifts that deserved appreciation and reciprocation. Infrastructure. Michael was acknowledging that he'd begun to view me as a utility that enabled their comfortable life, rather than as a person whose contributions deserved recognition and gratitude. Michael, I said, I want you to think about a specific example that illustrates how this shift affected your behavior. Tell me about the last time you thanked me for something specific, not just a general thanks for everything, but recognition of a particular contribution I'd made. Michael's face went pale as he realized he couldn't immediately recall such an instance. I can't remember, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I honestly can't remember the last time I specifically thanked you for something you'd done for our family. And when was the last time you asked about my own needs, interests, or plans before making assumptions about my availability? Another long silence. I can't remember that either, Michael said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Mom, I think I've been treating you like someone whose only purpose was to support my family's goals rather than someone with your own life and priorities. This recognition was exactly what I'd hoped our conversation would produce, but I needed to understand how deep Michael's awareness actually went. Tell me about the decision-making process for your family's major plans, I said. Vacations, career moves, social commitments, financial decisions. How often was I consulted or even informed before plans were finalized? Michael's expression became increasingly pained as he contemplated my question. We didn't consult you, he said. We made our plans and then figured out how to arrange childcare and support to make them possible. We assumed you'd be available and willing to help, without considering whether our plans aligned with your own preferences or schedule. And how did you justify that approach to yourselves? I asked. I think we told ourselves that we were trying, not to burden you with decisions that were ultimately our responsibility, Michael said. But really, I think we were avoiding conversations that might have resulted in you saying no to things we wanted to do. Avoiding conversations that might result in me saying no. Michael was acknowledging that they deliberately structured their communication to prevent me from exercising any agency over my own involvement in their plans. Michael, I said, I want you to think about your relationship with Jennifer's parents. How do you interact with them when you need favors or support? We ask politely, Michael said immediately. We explain what we need, check their availability, express gratitude for their help, and try to reciprocate whenever possible. And why do you treat Jennifer's parents differently than you've been treating me? The implications of my question hit Michael like a physical blow. He was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the comparison I was asking him to make. Because we don't take Jennifer's parents for granted, he said finally. We know that if we're rude or presumptuous with them, they'll stop helping us. We treat them with respect because we understand that their support is conditional on our behavior. And you assumed my support was unconditional regardless of how you treated me? Yes, Michael said, his voice breaking. I assumed that because you're my mother and you love me, you'd continue helping no matter how I behaved. I took advantage of your love instead of honoring it. This was the recognition I'd been hoping to hear. Acknowledgement that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance for disrespectful treatment. Michael, I said, I want you to understand something important about the night at Marcello's. Being forgotten and abandoned wasn't just hurtful. It was the logical conclusion of a process that had been underway for years. Michael nodded, tears now flowing freely. You and Jennifer had gradually trained yourselves to see me as background, support rather than as a person with my own needs and dignity, I continued. Last night, that mindset reached its natural endpoint when you literally forgot I existed. Mom, I am so incredibly sorry, Michael said. Not just for last night, but for years of taking you for granted, for treating your love like an entitlement instead of a gift, for forgetting that respect isn't optional in family relationships. What do you think needs to change? I asked. Everything, Michael said without hesitation. The way we communicate with you, the way we make requests, the way we show appreciation for your help, the way we include you in family decisions and treat you like the valued family member you are. And what about compensation for the services you've been receiving for free? Michael nodded eagerly. Jennifer and I talked about that this morning. We know that we need to start paying you appropriately for childcare and other support. Not because we want to turn our relationship into a business transaction, but because paying for your services will help us remember that your time and energy are valuable. Why do you think paying for my services would change your behavior? I asked. Because people value what they pay for, Michael said. When something is free, it's easy to take it for granted. When you're paying for it, you're more careful about making requests, more appreciative of the service, and more respectful of the person providing it. This understanding suggested that Michael was grasping some of the psychological dynamics that had contributed to our relationship problems. Michael, I said, I appreciate your recognition of these issues, and I can see that last night forced you to confront some uncomfortable truths about how you've been treating me. But I need you to understand that rebuilding our relationship is going to require consistent changes in behavior, not just promises and good intentions. I understand, Michael said, and I'm prepared to prove through my actions that I've learned from this experience. What specific changes are you planning to make? I asked. Michael pulled out his phone and showed me notes he'd apparently been making throughout the day. First, formal compensation for all the services you provide, he said. Jennifer and I researched professional childcare rates, and we want to start paying you $200 per week for regular childcare, plus additional compensation for extra hours and special requests. Second, advance consultation for any requests that would affect your schedule. No more assumptions about your availability. We'll ask about your plans before making any commitments that would require your support. Third, inclusion in family decision-making. You should be consulted about vacation plans, major purchases, and other decisions that affect the whole family. Fourth, regular appreciation and recognition for your contributions. We want to establish better communication about how grateful we are for everything you do. And fifth, social inclusion. No more being excluded from family events or treated like hired help in social situations. You're Emma, Lucas, and Sophie's grandmother, and you should be included and honored as such. Michael's list was comprehensive and thoughtful, suggesting he'd given serious consideration to the specific changes that needed to happen. Those all sound like positive changes, I said. But Michael, I need you to understand that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I'm going to need to see consistent evidence of these changes before I'm willing to resume the level of support your family has been receiving. What does that mean practically? Michael asked. It means that for the immediate future, my availability for childcare and other support will be limited and conditional, I said. I'm going to need to see proof that you and Jennifer have internalized these lessons before I'm comfortable making major commitments to help your family. Michael nodded, though I could see concern in his expression about the practical implications of reduced support. Mom, I understand that we need to earn back your trust, he said, but I'm hoping you'll give us the opportunity to prove that we've learned from this experience. We'll see, I said. But Michael, I want you to understand that the days of taking my support for granted are over permanently. Even if we rebuild our relationship successfully, it will be based on mutual respect and appreciation rather than assumptions about my availability. I wouldn't want it any other way, Michael said. I realize now that the way we've been treating you was not only wrong but also unsustainable. A relationship based on taking advantage of someone's generosity can't last indefinitely. As our conversation continued, Michael shared more details about how the previous night's experience had affected him emotionally and practically. Washing dishes until 2 a.m. was humiliating, he said. But not because of the work itself. It was humiliating because it forced me to confront how irresponsibly Jennifer and I had been behaving. We'd gone to an expensive restaurant without any plan for paying the bill, assuming that someone else, you, would handle that responsibility. Tsao paused, shaking his head at the memory. And when we realized you weren't there, our first reaction wasn't concern for your well-being or guilt about forgetting you. It was panic about how we were going to solve our practical problems without your help. What did that reaction tell you about your priorities? I asked. It told me that I'd been seeing you as a resource to be utilized rather than as a person to be cherished, Michael said. And it made me realize how similar my behavior had become to the way Dad's colleagues used to treat their wives, as support staff whose contributions were expected rather than appreciated. This comparison to his father's generation was insightful, and I was curious about how Michael viewed the gender dynamics that had influenced our family relationship. Tell me more about that comparison, I said. You know how Dad used to complain about his colleagues who expected their wives to handle all domestic responsibilities while taking credit for any family success? Michael asked. I think I've been doing something similar with you, expecting you to handle childcare and family support, while Jennifer and I get credit for our professional achievements. And how do you think your father would react to learning that you'd been treating me that way? Michael's expression became pained. He'd be ashamed of me, he said without hesitation. Dad spent his entire life treating you as his equal partner, and he raised me to understand that respecting women, especially my mother, was non-negotiable. What do you think went wrong? I asked. I think success made me complacent, Michael said. As my practice became profitable and our lifestyle became comfortable, I stopped thinking about the people and sacrifices that had made that success possible. I started taking credit for achievements that were really the result of collective family effort. This reflection suggested that Michael was beginning to understand some of the deeper issues that had contributed to our relationship problems. "Michael," I said, "I want you to think about Emma, Lucas, and Sophie. What kind of lessons do you think they've been learning about how to treat family members who provide support and assistance?" The question clearly troubled Michael deeply. "They've been learning that it's okay to take people for granted if those people love you enough to keep helping regardless of how they're treated," he said. "They've been learning that appreciation and respect are optional in family relationships. And what kind of adults do you think that will make them?" "The kind of adults who treat their own elderly parents the way I've been treating you," Michael said, his voice heavy with regret. "The kind of adults who see family support as entitlement rather than gift." "Is that the legacy you want to leave?" I asked. "No," Michael said firmly. "I want Emma, Lucas, and Sophie to grow up understanding that respect and appreciation are required in all relationships, especially family relationships. I want them to see their father treating their grandmother with the dignity and gratitude she deserves." "Then you understand why last night's lesson was necessary," I said. "I do," Michael said. "And I'm grateful that you cared enough about our family to teach us something we obviously needed to learn, even though it required letting us face some unpleasant consequences." As our conversation wound down, Michael made one final request that demonstrated his understanding of how fundamentally our dynamic needed to change. "Mom," he said, "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything right now, but I'm hoping you'll help me teach Emma, Lucas, and Sophie about respect and appreciation. I want them to understand what I did wrong so they don't make the same mistakes with their own families." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "I want them to understand the value of your contributions to our family," Michael said. "I want them to learn about gratitude, respect for elders, and the importance of treating family members with dignity. I think hearing about these lessons from you would be more meaningful than hearing them from me." This request suggested that Michael was thinking beyond immediate damage control to longer-term family values and relationships. "I'd be happy to have those conversations with them," I said. "But Michael, I need you to understand that my relationship with my grandchildren shouldn't be dependent on my relationship with you and Jennifer. They deserve to have a grandmother who's valued and respected, regardless of how their parents choose to behave." "You're absolutely right," Michael said. "And I promise that going forward, Emma, Lucas, and Sophie will see their parents treating you with the respect and appreciation you've always deserved." As Michael prepared to leave, he turned back to me with one final observation. "Mom," I realize, "now that the most important thing Dad taught me wasn't about business or success or financial planning, it was about treating the people you love with respect and dignity. I lost sight of that lesson, but I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I remember it now." Watching Michael drive away that afternoon, I felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding our family relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. His recognition of the problem seemed genuine, his understanding of the necessary changes appeared comprehensive, and his commitment to behavioral modification felt sincere. But I also knew that good intentions and heartfelt apologies would be meaningless without consistent follow-through. The real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, when the emotional impact of last night's lesson began to fade, and Michael and Jennifer had to demonstrate whether they'd truly internalized the values they'd promised to embrace. The foundation had been laid for a better relationship, but the actual construction of that relationship would require daily choices about respect, appreciation, and recognition of my worth as both a family member and a person whose dignity deserved protection. The golden beginning of our new dynamic would depend entirely on whether my son and daughter-in-law could prove that they understood the difference between saying they valued me and actually treating me like someone whose value was indispensable to their family's happiness and success. The real test of Michael and Jennifer's transformation began the following Monday morning, when their new reality collided with their old assumptions about my availability. At 7:15 a.m., My phone rang with what I immediately recognized as a potential crisis. Jennifer's panicked voice explaining that their regular babysitter had called in sick, and they both had important meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. In the old dynamic, this call would have been a statement rather than a request. Rose, we need you to watch the kids today because Sarah is sick. Jennifer would have assumed my availability, expected my compliance, and treated my assistance as a foregone conclusion rather than a favor requiring gratitude. But this morning, Jennifer's approach was entirely different. Rose, she began, her voice carrying genuine uncertainty rather than entitled expectation. I know we discussed the need to ask rather than assume, and I'm hoping you might be available to help us with an emergency. Our babysitter is sick, and Michael has a dental conference call with potential investors while I have a closing that's been scheduled for months. Would it be possible for you to watch the children today? We'd pay your full daily rate, of course, and we'd be incredibly grateful for your help. The transformation in Jennifer's communication style was immediate and obvious. She was asking, rather than demanding, acknowledging compensation rather than assuming free service, and expressing gratitude rather than taking my assistance for granted. Most importantly, she was framing my help as a favor she hoped to receive rather than a service she expected me to provide. What time would you need me there? I asked, genuinely pleased by the respectful approach to her request. Michael's call starts at 9, and my closing is at 10, Jennifer said. So if you could be here by 8:30, that would give us time to get the children settled and brief you on their schedules for the day. I'll be there at 8:30, I said. And Jennifer? Thank you for asking respectfully rather than assuming my availability. Thank you for being willing to help us, Jennifer replied. We know that your time is valuable, and we really appreciate your flexibility. When I arrived at their house that morning, the changes in their behavior were immediately apparent. Michael greeted me at the door with genuine warmth and gratitude, helped carry my things inside, and spent several minutes explaining the children's schedules and any special needs for the day. Jennifer provided written instructions about meals, activities, and emergency contacts, not because she doubted my competence, but because she wanted to ensure I had all the information necessary to provide excellent care without stress or confusion. Most significantly, before leaving for their respective commitments, both Michael and Jennifer took time to thank me personally for helping their family during an unexpected crisis. Mom, I can't tell you how much this means to us, Michael said as he prepared to leave for his conference call. Having you available for emergencies like this makes it possible for us to handle our professional responsibilities without compromising the children's care. We know this was short notice, Jennifer added, and we're really grateful that you were able to rearrange your own schedule to help us. But the most telling moment came when 8-year-old Emma approached me as her parents were leaving. Grandma Rose, she said, Mommy and Daddy said you're going to take extra special care of us today because our regular babysitter is sick. They said we should be extra good and helpful because you're doing something really nice for our family. Emma's comment revealed that Michael and Jennifer had taken the time to frame my assistance to their children as a generous favor rather than an automatic family obligation. They were actively teaching Emma, Lucas, and Sophie to appreciate my contributions rather than take them for granted. Throughout that day, I received text messages from both Michael and Jennifer checking on how things were going and expressing continued gratitude for my help. When they returned home that evening, they both thanked me again, paid me the agreed-upon compensation immediately, and asked if there was anything they could do to reciprocate my assistance. This single day demonstrated that Michael and Jennifer's promises about changing their behavior weren't just empty words spoken in the aftermath of crisis. They were implementing concrete changes in how they communicated with me, how they valued my contributions, and how they taught their children to think about family relationships. But the real test of their transformation would come over the following weeks and months, as the emotional impact of the Marcello's incident faded, and they had to sustain their new approach to our family dynamic without the motivation of immediate crisis. The first major test came 3 weeks later, when Jennifer received an invitation to a prestigious real estate conference in Miami that would require weekend childcare. In the past, she would have accepted the invitation immediately and then informed me about the childcare arrangements she'd assumed I would provide. This time, her approach was entirely different. Jennifer called me on a Tuesday evening to discuss the opportunity before making any commitments. "Rose, I've been invited to a real estate conference in Miami that could be really beneficial for my career," she began. "It's a weekend event from Friday evening through Sunday afternoon, which would mean I'd need childcare for about 48 hours. Before I accept the invitation, I wanted to check whether you'd be interested in providing care during that time, and if so, what compensation would be appropriate." The difference in Jennifer's approach was striking. Instead of assuming my availability and expecting me to accommodate her professional goals, she was consulting me before making commitments and asking about my preferences regarding compensation. "When is the conference?" I asked. 3 weeks from now, the weekend of October 15th, Jennifer said. "I know it's not much notice, and I completely understand if you already have plans or if weekend care isn't something you're comfortable providing." "Let me check my calendar," I said, genuinely appreciating being treated as someone whose own schedule mattered. "And Jennifer, I appreciate you consulting me before accepting the invitation rather than assuming I'd be available." "Of course," Jennifer said. "We learned our lesson about making assumptions. Your time is valuable and we need to respect your schedule and preferences." After confirming that I was available and agreeing on weekend compensation rates, Jennifer accepted the conference invitation. But what impressed me most was what happened next. 2 days later, Jennifer called again with additional information about the weekend arrangements. "Rose, I wanted to let you know that I've arranged for a housekeeping service to come on Saturday morning so you won't have to worry about cleaning while you're watching the children," she said. "And I've scheduled grocery delivery for Friday afternoon so the house will be fully stocked with everything you and the kids might need." "Jennifer, that wasn't necessary," I said, though I was touched by her consideration. "I know it wasn't necessary," she replied. "But I want to make sure that caring for the children is as easy and stress-free as possible for you. You're doing us a huge favor by making this conference possible, and I want to show my appreciation through actions, not just words." This attention to making my childcare responsibilities easier and more pleasant demonstrated that Jennifer was thinking about my experience and comfort rather than just her own convenience. She was actively working to ensure that helping her family was a positive experience for me, rather than a burden I was expected to bear. The weekend itself went smoothly, but what really impressed me was Jennifer's behavior when she returned from Miami. Instead of simply thanking me and moving on, she took time to debrief about the weekend and ask about my experience. "How did everything go?" she asked when she got home Sunday evening. "Were there any problems or challenges? Is there anything I could have done differently to make the weekend easier for you?" When I mentioned that Lucas had been particularly helpful with his younger sister, Jennifer made a point of praising his behavior and explaining that helping Grandma Rose was an important family responsibility. "Lucas, I heard from Grandma Rose that you were especially helpful with Sophie this weekend," Jennifer said in front of all 3 children. "That shows real maturity and consideration for others. I'm proud of you for understanding that when someone does something nice for our family, we should do everything we can to make their job easier." These kinds of conversations were teaching Emma, Lucas, and Sophie valuable lessons about gratitude, reciprocity, and respect for people who provide support and assistance. Jennifer and Michael were actively modeling the behavior they wanted their children to internalize about family relationships and appreciation for others' contributions. But the most significant test of their transformation came 2 months later, during the Thanksgiving holiday planning process. In previous years, Michael and Jennifer had made holiday plans without consulting me, and then informed me about my expected role in meal preparation, childcare, and hosting responsibilities. This year, their approach was entirely different. Inside. Early November, Michael called to initiate a family discussion about Thanksgiving arrangements. Mom, Jennifer, and I wanted to talk with you about Thanksgiving plans, he said. We know that in the past, we've made assumptions about holiday arrangements without consulting you, and we want to handle this year differently. What did you have in mind? I asked. We'd love to have Thanksgiving at your house again, if you're comfortable hosting, Michael said. But we want to discuss how to handle the cooking, cleaning, and preparation so that hosting is enjoyable for you rather than stressful. This was a dramatic departure from previous years, when they'd assumed I would handle the majority of Thanksgiving preparation while they arrived as guests rather than contributors. And we want to talk about inviting Jennifer's parents, Michael continued. We think it would be nice for the children to have both sets of grandparents together, but we want to make sure you're comfortable with the larger group and that we plan the logistics carefully. The fact that Michael was asking about my comfort, level with the guest list, and acknowledging the need for careful planning showed that he was thinking about my experience as the host, rather than just assuming I would accommodate whatever arrangements were most convenient for everyone else. We scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday to discuss Thanksgiving plans in detail. When Jennifer, Michael, and I sat down together, their approach to the conversation demonstrated how thoroughly their perspective on family decision-making had changed. Rose, we want to start by saying that if hosting Thanksgiving feels like too much work or stress, we're completely open to alternative arrangements, Jennifer began. We could host at our house, or we could make restaurant reservations, or we could scale back the celebration entirely. But if you're interested in hosting, Michael added, we want to discuss how to make it a collaborative effort rather than putting all the responsibility on you. We spent the next hour developing a detailed plan for Thanksgiving that distributed responsibilities fairly among all the adults. Jennifer would handle appetizers and desserts. Michael would manage drinks and table settings. Jennifer's parents would contribute side dishes, and I would focus on the turkey and my traditional stuffing recipe. Most importantly, we established clear expectations about cleanup, with rotating responsibilities that ensured no single person would be stuck handling all the post-meal work. And we want to hire a cleaning service to deep clean the house before and after Thanksgiving, Jennifer said. That way you can focus on enjoying the holiday rather than worrying about housework. Jennifer, that's very thoughtful, but it's not necessary, I said. Mom, it is necessary, Michael interjected. We want to show our appreciation for your willingness to host by making sure the experience is pleasant for you. You shouldn't have to do extra cleaning work just because you're generous enough to open your home for family celebrations. This conversation revealed how fundamentally Michael and Jennifer's thinking about family obligations had changed. Instead of viewing my hosting as a service I provided for their convenience, they were treating it as a generous gift that deserved recognition and reciprocal consideration. The Thanksgiving celebration itself was a beautiful demonstration of how much our family dynamic had improved. Jennifer's parents, Harold and Patricia Richardson, were gracious guests who contributed meaningfully to both the meal preparation and the conversation. Michael and Jennifer were attentive hosts who ensured that everyone felt included and appreciated. But the most meaningful moment came when Michael asked everyone to share what they were grateful for before we began eating. I want to start, Michael said, because I have something important to say to my mother. He turned to look directly at me, his expression serious and emotional. Mom, this year I'm grateful for the lesson you taught me about respect, appreciation, and family values, he said. 6 months ago, I was taking your love and support for granted, treating you like hired help instead of like the amazing mother and grandmother you are. The room was completely quiet as Michael continued. I'm grateful that you cared enough about our family to teach me that love doesn't mean accepting disrespectful treatment, and that family relationships require appreciation and reciprocity to be healthy and sustainable. He paused, his voice becoming more emotional. Most of all, I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to learn how to be the kind of son you raised me to be. and the kind of father I want Emma, Lucas, and Sophie to be proud of. Jennifer spoke next, her own gratitude equally heartfelt. I'm grateful for Rose's patience, wisdom, and grace during a period when I was behaving terribly, she said. I'm grateful that she taught me the difference between entitled expectation and genuine appreciation. And I'm grateful that she's helping me learn how to be a better wife, mother, and daughter-in-law. Even Harold and Patricia Richardson expressed gratitude for my role in their family's life, acknowledging the support I'd provided to Michael and Jennifer's success and the love I'd shown to their grandchildren. But perhaps the most touching moment came when 8-year-old Emma shared her own gratitude. I'm grateful for Grandma Rose because she takes such good care of us, Emma said. And I'm grateful that Mommy and Daddy learned how to say thank you better, because now our family is happier. Emma's observation that our family was happier since Michael and Jennifer had learned to express appreciation more effectively captured something important about how their transformation had affected the entire household dynamic. After Thanksgiving, the positive changes in our family relationship continued to develop and strengthen. Michael and Jennifer maintained their new approach to communication, consistently asking rather than assuming, expressing gratitude rather than taking my help for granted, and including me in family decisions rather than informing me about plans that had already been made. The compensation arrangement we'd established had evolved into something more comprehensive than simple payment for childcare services. Michael had set up what he called a Family Appreciation Fund, a monthly payment that acknowledged the full scope of my contributions to their household's success and stability. Mom, we've been thinking about everything you do for our family, Michael explained when he first proposed the monthly arrangement. Childcare is just one part of it. You provide emergency support, financial advice, emotional guidance, and the kind of family stability that allows Jennifer and me to take professional risks and pursue opportunities. We want to establish a monthly payment that reflects the true value of your contributions, Jennifer added. Not because we want to turn our relationship into a business transaction, but because consistent compensation helps us remember to value and appreciate everything you do. The monthly amount they proposed was generous enough to feel meaningful without being so large that it created awkwardness or obligation. More importantly, the way they presented it emphasized appreciation rather than payment for services. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Emma, Lucas, and Sophie had learned to think about family relationships and respect for others. The lessons they'd absorbed from watching their parents' transformation had created a generation of children who understood that gratitude and consideration were essential elements of healthy family dynamics. This became most apparent during a conversation I had with 10-year-old Lucas about 6 months after the Marcello's incident. Grandma Rose, Lucas said as I was helping him with his homework one afternoon. I'm glad Mommy and Daddy learned how to be nicer to you. What do you mean by that, sweetheart? I asked. Well, they used to just expect you to help with stuff without saying please or thank you very much, Lucas explained with the directness that children bring to adult situations. But now they ask nicely and they pay you, and they say thank you. A lot more. How does that make you feel? I asked. It makes me feel better about our family, Lucas said thoughtfully. Because now, when I help with something, Mommy and Daddy remember to thank me too, and they don't just expect me to do things without being nice about it. Lucas's observation revealed that Michael and Jennifer's improved treatment of me had created a positive ripple effect throughout their household. By learning to express appreciation and respect in their relationship with me, they'd also become better at acknowledging and valuing their children's contributions to family life. This transformation had extended beyond our immediate family to Michael and Jennifer's broader social and professional relationships. Jennifer told me that her approach to working with clients had become more appreciative and collaborative, while Michael had implemented similar changes in how he managed his dental practice staff. Learning to value and respect your contributions taught me something important about leadership and teamwork, Michael explained during one of our regular coffee conversations. I realized that I'd been taking my employees' dedication for granted, the same way I'd been taking your help for granted. What changes did you make? I asked. I started expressing appreciation more regularly, providing better compensation and benefits, and including staff members in practice decisions that affect their work environment, Michael said. The result has been improved morale, better patient care, and a more positive workplace culture. Jennifer had experienced similar professional benefits from applying the lessons she'd learned about respect and appreciation to her real estate career. I used to think that clients should be grateful for my services without much effort on my part to show appreciation for their business, Jennifer said. But I learned from our family situation that relationships work better when appreciation flows in both directions. How has that changed your approach? I asked. I express gratitude more actively, I provide better client service, and I work harder to understand and meet my clients' needs rather than just expecting them to adapt to my preferred working style, Jennifer explained. My client retention has improved significantly, and my referral business has grown substantially. The professional benefits they'd experienced had reinforced their commitment to maintaining the improved family dynamics we'd developed. They'd learned that treating people with respect and appreciation wasn't just morally right. It was also practically effective for building strong, sustainable relationships in all areas of life. As our first anniversary of the Marcello's incident approached, I found myself reflecting on how completely our family dynamic had transformed. The woman who'd been forgotten and abandoned at a restaurant table had become the respected matriarch whose opinion was sought, whose comfort was prioritized, and whose contributions were celebrated rather than assumed. Michael and Jennifer had learned that taking someone for granted is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make, not just financially, but emotionally and relationally. They'd discovered that respect isn't optional in family relationships, that appreciation requires active expression, and that love without consideration isn't really love at all. Most importantly, they'd learned that treating elderly family members with dignity isn't just about being nice. It's about recognizing that wisdom, experience, and accumulated resources deserve acknowledgement and protection rather than exploitation and dismissal. The education I'd provided that night at Marcello's had transformed not just my relationship with Michael and Jennifer, but their relationships with their children, their employees, their clients, and their broader community. They'd learned that how you treat the people who support your success is a reflection of your character and a predictor of your long-term happiness and prosperity. 1 year later, I received an unexpected gift that demonstrated how thoroughly Michael and Jennifer had internalized the lessons about appreciation and family values. On the anniversary of the Marcello's incident, they surprised me with a family dinner at the same restaurant where everything had changed. But this time, the evening was entirely different. Jennifer had made reservations that specifically included me, and the planning had arranged for a private dining room that would allow for meaningful family conversation, and had coordinated with the restaurant to provide special recognition for the occasion. When we arrived at Marcello's, the manager who'd handled our bill situation a year earlier greeted us warmly and escorted us to a beautifully decorated table. Michael and Jennifer had worked with the restaurant to create a menu featuring my favorite dishes, and they'd arranged for a special dessert that celebrated our family's transformation. The most meaningful moment came when Michael stood up to make a toast. 1 year ago, in this restaurant, our family learned one of the most important lessons we'll ever learn, he began, looking directly at me. We learned that respect isn't optional, that appreciation requires action, and that love, without consideration, isn't really love at all. He raised his glass, and the rest of the family followed suit. Mom, thank you for caring enough about our family to teach us what we needed to learn, even when it required letting us face difficult consequences, Michael continued. Thank you for giving us the chance to become the kind of family we should have been all along. To Grandma Rose, Jennifer added, who taught us that wisdom, dignity, and accumulated experience deserve celebration rather than dismissal. who showed us that supporting someone's success creates an obligation to honor their contributions rather than take them for granted. Even Emma, Lucas, and Sophie participated in the toast, each expressing gratitude for having a grandmother who taught their family about respect, appreciation, and the importance of treating others with dignity. As I looked around the table at my family, my son who'd learned to value rather than assume, my daughter-in-law who'd discovered the difference between entitled expectation and genuine gratitude, and my grandchildren who were growing up, understanding that family relationships require active appreciation, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction about the transformation we'd achieved together. The woman who'd been forgotten at this restaurant table a year earlier was now the honored guest at a celebration of family values, mutual respect, and the kind of love that's demonstrated through actions rather than just words. Sometimes the people who dismiss you as irrelevant need to learn exactly how relevant you actually are. Sometimes the family members who take your support for granted need to experience what their lives would be like without it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that your dignity and respect are non-negotiable requirements, rather than optional considerations. That night at Marcello's, sitting at a table where I was valued rather than forgotten, included rather than abandoned, celebrated rather than dismissed, I understood that the most important lesson hadn't been the one I'd taught Michael and Jennifer about consequences and appreciation. The most important lesson had been the one I'd learned about my own worth, my own power, and my own right to demand the respect and consideration I deserved. You're never too old to teach people how to treat you properly. You're never too loving to require respect in return. You're never too family-oriented to demand that your dignity be protected rather than compromised. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is when someone pushes you far enough that you finally remember exactly who you are and what you're worth. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, they learn those lessons too. What's your story? Have you ever had to teach family members about respect and appreciation the hard way? Share your experience in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and demanding the treatment you deserve. You're never too old to start over, never too experienced to demand respect, and never too loving to require that your dignity be protected. Sometimes you just need to show people exactly what they stand to lose when they take you for granted. Because respect isn't a gift that others give you. It's a requirement that you enforce. And the most powerful lesson you can teach someone is that forgetting your worth is the most expensive mistake they'll ever make. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.